Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath the sky, so clear it felt artificially composed, as if reality itself had paused for a moment of silence. The MV Blackwater Dawn moved through the stillness with steady engines and disciplined precision, its steel body cutting a path through waters that offered no resistance. It was the kind of night that should have carried no memory, no warning, and no reason to remember it later. Inside the bridge, Captain Elias Monroe stood with the posture of a man trained to command uncertainty, even when it lived inside him. Yet behind that discipline was something heavier. A loop of sound played quietly through his private device, his daughter's birthday message. Her voice carried warmth from another world, reminding him of a life that continued without him. He replayed it again without fully realizing why, as if repetition could preserve what distance kept stealing. Below the surface of routine operations, the ship carried more than cargo. The official manifest listed industrial equipment, sealed machinery, and logistical supplies for a private contractor, but entire sections were blacked out. Weight records did not fully align with storage capacity. Even experienced crew members avoided questioning it aloud, as if silence itself had become part of the protocol. Nora Vance moved through the corridors with the quiet focus of someone assigned to observe what others preferred not to see. Her presence on the Blackwater Dawn was not routine. She had been brought in after cargo irregularities flagged the vessel's documentation, though the explanation given to her was deliberately incomplete. She understood the difference between missing information and hidden truth, and this ship carried the latter in abundance. In the radio room, Caleb Rourke monitored frequency logs with growing discomfort. The ship's communication systems were stable on the surface, yet subtle distortions began to appear between transmissions, fractions of delay that should not exist. He marked them carefully, unsure whether he was witnessing technical drift or something more deliberate interfering from beyond standard channels. Far below, Mason Creed moved through the engine corridors, listening not just to machines but to patterns. The engines ran smoothly, yet beneath their rhythm he detected inconsistencies in vibration feedback, as though metal was responding to something external rather than internal force. He did not report it immediately. Experience had taught him that unexplained mechanical behavior often worsened once acknowledged. Across the vessel, unease spread in quiet forms. Crew members avoided lower decks without instruction. Sleep became fragmented. Conversations shortened. Some claimed they heard metallic knocking from sealed cargo compartments. Slow, deliberate impacts that did not match any operational cycle. No one confirmed it openly, but no one fully dismissed it either. Even the ocean contributed to the discomfort. Its stillness was too complete, lacking the subtle motion that should have accompanied their forward momentum. It felt less like sailing and more like being observed in transit. Elias noticed it without comment, though his mind returned briefly to a classified maritime disappearance report he had once been forced to read, one involving a ship that vanished under identical conditions of calm and certainty. Then came the anomaly. Caleb paused mid-log as the GPS display flickered once, correcting itself too quickly to feel natural. The deviation was small enough to dismiss, yet precise enough to be recorded. Elias was informed, reviewed it briefly, and labeled it a system fluctuation. Still, something in his expression tightened, as if recognition had brushed against memory. And just as the ship continued forward into uninterrupted silence, the radar screen illuminated an object that carried no registry, no transponder signal, and no possible existence on any known map. The transition from uncertainty to undeniable contradiction happened quietly on the MV Blackwater Dawn, without alarms or dramatic signals, only the steady glow of a radar anomaly that refused to behave like anything understood by navigation logic. Outside the bridge windows, the Pacific Ocean remained uninterrupted, an endless sheet of motionless darkness, offering no evidence of what the system insisted was closing in. At first, the crew reacted with restrained skepticism. Some dismissed the reading as equipment lag. Others assumed a brief sense of misalignment caused by environmental noise. But the longer the signal remained locked in place, the harder it became to preserve denial. Confusion began shifting into something more unstable, forced rationalization without evidence to support it. Caleb Rourke escalated the issue through every available diagnostic layer. He reran system checks, isolated satellite feeds, and cross-referenced positional data. The anomaly remained consistent across all channels. It was not drifting, not corrupting, not fading. It behaved like a fixed object occupying real coordinates in open ocean space. When he finally spoke again, his tone carried the weight of reluctant certainty. It was not an error. Captain Elias Monroe stepped closer to the radar display, his eyes scanning the readings with controlled focus. He did not immediately respond. Instead, he studied the pattern as if it might eventually reveal a logical break. When it did not, he ordered visual confirmation, though the command carried a hesitation that even discipline could not fully conceal. Outside, the ocean offered no cooperation. The horizon remained completely empty. No reflection, no disturbance, no shadow breaking the uniform darkness. The contradiction between machine certainty and physical reality grew sharper with every passing second, as though the ship existed between two incompatible versions of the same world. Nora Vance moved quietly across the bridge, her attention no longer limited to the anomaly itself. She began tracing inconsistencies in the vessel's log trajectory, noticing subtle deviations that suggested the ship had been following a route that did not fully match its official assignment. The cargo, the path, and the unexplained radar presence began forming a pattern she did not yet have language for. Below deck, Mason Creed reported irregular vibration patterns building within the lower engine supports. The rhythm was not mechanical failure, and not environmental response. It came in pulses that matched no operational cycle, as if something external was interacting with the ship's structure without physical contact. He did not explain it further, but his silence was heavier than interpretation. Across the vessel, behavioral changes became noticeable. Crew members stopped speaking in full sentences. Eye contact was avoided almost instinctively, as though acknowledgement might anchor the situation into reality in a way no one would prepare to face. The ship felt less like a workplace and more like a shared containment space for something undefined. The radar object shifted closer again, still invisible to the naked eye. Its approach was measured, deliberate, and precise enough to suggest intent. Yet the ocean remained unchanged, refusing to validate its existence. Then came the interference. Radio channels fractured briefly with microstatic bursts that had no originating transmission. Caleb noticed something beneath the distortion. A second signal layered under the main frequency, faint but structured, as if attempting to synchronize with human communication patterns. Elias's thoughts broke momentarily into memory. A classified maritime file he had once reviewed described a vessel that vanished under identical conditions in the same coordinates, with final system logs that behaved in ways no one could explain or replicate. He dismissed the connection almost immediately, but the recognition lingered longer than he wanted. Command stability began to erode, not through panic, but through accumulated contradictions that no authority could reconcile. Suspicion quietly shifted among the crew toward possibilities no one wanted to articulate: experimental cargo systems, unauthorized tracking technology, or undisclosed military operations. Caleb froze again, his attention locked on the secondary signal. For a brief moment, it stabilized, structured enough to feel intentional, not accidental. Something was trying to communicate through the noise beneath normal reality. And then the radar object vanished completely for 7 seconds, before reappearing directly inside the ship's projected path. The Blackwater Dawn no longer felt like a vessel reacting to an external mystery. Instead, the focus of unease shifted inward, as though the true source of instability had always been sealed beneath its own decks. The radar anomaly still lingered in everyone's mind, but attention gradually drifted toward a more disturbing possibility: the idea that whatever was approaching might already be inside the ship. Nora Vance was the first to challenge the silence forming around the cargo. Standing near the command console, she demanded access to the sealed sections of the manifest that had been partially redacted. Her request was precise, not emotional, but the pressure behind it exposed how little transparency existed within the ship's official records. The refusal came quickly from command, yet Captain Elias Monroe's hesitation revealed more than his words allowed. Mason Creed reported a shift in the lower storage environment that did not align with any known mechanical or atmospheric behavior. Certain containers registered fluctuating internal temperatures despite being fully insulated and isolated from engine heat. The pattern was inconsistent with failure and too structured to be coincidence. suggesting internal activity that should not have been possible. At the same time, the metallic knocking from the cargo holds intensified. It was no longer random or sporadic. The impacts followed rhythm, repetition, and spacing that resembled communication rather than mechanical resonance. Each sequence seemed deliberate, as if something within the sealed space was responding to the ship itself. The breaking point came when a junior crew member stumbled onto the bridge in visible distress. He claimed he had seen movement inside one of the sealed containers, movement that did not match shifting cargo or structural vibration. His description fractured into panic before he could complete it, and he was escorted away as his voice broke into uncontrolled repetition. No one contradicted him openly, but no one confirmed him either. Fear began spreading in silence rather than speech. Conversations shortened further. Crew members avoided speaking directly about the cargo, as though naming it might transform suspicion into certainty. The ship had entered a psychological state where acknowledgement itself felt dangerous. Captain Elias Monroe, alone in the privacy of the navigation archive, accessed restricted cargo files marked Company Eyes Only. The data was incomplete, fragmented, and deliberately obscured in sections that suggested intentional concealment rather than routine confidentiality. Whatever the Blackwater Dawn carried, it had never been meant for full comprehension. In the radio room, Caleb Rourke noticed something buried inside the GPS correction signal. Beneath standard synchronization data, there was an encrypted transmission repeating at irregular intervals. It did not originate externally. It was embedded, structured, and persistent, as though part of the ship's own systems had begun transmitting something it was never designed to send. Nora's suspicion evolved rapidly. She no longer viewed the cargo as ordinary industrial equipment. The inconsistencies in routing, documentation gaps, and signal anomalies suggested a deeper classification, possibly tied to experimental deep-sea recovery operations or unauthorized retrieval projects that should never have left containment oversight. Psychological instability spread quietly across the vessel. Sleep deprivation turned into hallucination-like reports. Crew members described hearing voices and engine noise, seeing movement in peripheral shadows, and feeling vibrations that had no physical source. Yet no one wanted to be the first to confirm that reality itself felt unstable. Outside, the Pacific Ocean remained unnaturally still. No waves broke the surface with normal rhythm, and no distant wind disrupted its silence. The absence of movement made everything feel enclosed, as though the ship were no longer traveling through water, but suspended inside something far larger and far more controlled. Then Mason Creed's voice broke through internal communication, lower than usual, carrying a tension he could not suppress. One sealed container had begun registering a slow but measurable increase in internal pressure, as if something inside had just woken up. The Blackwater Dawn began to lose its relationship with direction in a way no one aboard could fully explain. It was not a physical shift at first, but a digital betrayal, an erosion of certainty inside the navigation systems that once defined the ship's place in the vast Pacific. The ocean outside remained unchanged, yet every instrument insisted the vessel was somewhere it should not be. The terrifying realization spread slowly that the ship was no longer just lost. It might be being moved to reality without its consent. Caleb Rourke was the first to document the instability in precise terms. The GPS readings were no longer drifting randomly. They were jumping between coordinates across distant ocean zones. Each shift was brief but measurable, forming a repeating triangular pattern that made no geographical sense. It was as if the ship's position was being rewritten rather than relocated. Captain Elias Monroe initially dismissed the readings as satellite interference. His experience demanded skepticism before fear. But skepticism weakened when the pattern stabilized. The coordinates were not chaotic. They were structured, returning to the same 3 points with mechanical consistency, as though something external was forcing the system into repetition. Nora Vance studied the anomaly from a different angle. She correlated each GPS jump with the subtle vibration spikes reported from the lower cargo decks. The timing alignment was too precise to ignore. It suggested that whatever was happening to navigation data was not separate from the ship's internal activity, but directly connected to it. Mason Creed confirmed something even more unsettling. Despite the navigation systems reporting violent positional shifts, The ship's physical movement remained stable. Engines were steady, hull resistance unchanged. There was no evidence that the vessel had moved at all in the ways the digital systems claimed. Reality and data were no longer synchronized. A quiet fear began spreading among the crew as they questioned something fundamental. Whether they were still in the same part of the ocean, they believed they were. The idea did not need to be spoken aloud to take hold. It formed in glances, pauses, and the growing reluctance to trust any instrument completely. Then the radio system fractured. At first, it was faint static, but it quickly evolved into fragmented transmissions that did not match any known channel. Voices appeared for milliseconds at a time, distorted, layered, and incomplete. None of them matched active distress frequencies, and none of them originated from known vessels in the region. Elias Monroe felt something tighten in his memory as he accessed a classified maritime file he had once been forced to review. It described a vessel disappearance under identical conditions. Calm waters, stable systems, and GPS readings that began behaving in impossible geometric patterns before all contact was lost. The psychological stability of the crew began to collapse in fragments. Junior members reported disorientation, forgetting short spans of time, and experiencing brief moments where corridors appeared unfamiliar despite being unchanged. Fear no longer needed proof. It was being reinforced by every system aboard the ship. Even navigation backups began failing in unusual ways. Old coordinate overlays appeared on secondary displays, showing routes that belonged to shipping charts from decades ago. These were not stored maps. They were historical routes resurfacing without command input, as if the system was remembering something it was never meant to access. Caleb noticed another anomaly, a mismatch between real-time and system time logs. The ship's internal clock drifted by seconds that could not be accounted for through hardware failure or signal delay. Time itself was no longer consistent between systems. Then the compass reacted. Without magnetic disturbance, wind influence, or mechanical fault, it began to rotate slowly, as though responding to a force no instrument could detect. The motion was deliberate, not erratic, pointing toward nothing in particular, yet refusing to settle. And then every navigation screen across the Blackwater Dawn simultaneously flashed a single message. You are not where you think you are. The message on the navigation screens did not fade quickly. Even after it disappeared, it lingered in the crew's behavior like a silent contamination, reshaping how every sound, every shadow, and every vibration was interpreted aboard the Blackwater Dawn. The ship no longer felt like a vessel moving through the ocean. It felt like something contained within it. The most terrifying realization spread without words. Whatever was inside the ship was no longer silent, and it was beginning to respond. The metallic knocking that had once been dismissed as structural noise evolved into something far more deliberate. The rhythm changed, no longer random or isolated. It formed patterns, repetitive sequences that carried the unsettling impression of communication. Each impact felt timed, as if responding to the presence of those listening above. Crew members began reporting footsteps beneath the sealed cargo deck. The description was always the same: slow movement, steady pacing, and directionality that suggested awareness of human presence above. The problem was structural. There were no approved access routes beneath that level, no maintenance pathways that could logically support such movement. Mason Creed refused to enter the engine-linked lower structure alone after his first inspection. He did not explain his decision, but the silence his refusal carried more weight than any technical report. For someone who had spent years inside mechanical systems, hesitation itself was a form of alarm. Nora Vance began collecting testimonies from crew members, documenting every account with precise consistency. The details were identical across unrelated individuals: rhythmic knocking, synchronized vibrations, and a sensation of being answered from beneath the ship. The uniformity of description suggested a shared experience rather than isolated hallucination. Emotional tension reached a breaking point when fear stopped being individual and became collective. No one needed to confirm what they were experiencing anymore. Recognition had already replaced doubt. The crew moved differently, spoke less, and avoided standing near structural points where sound was strongest. Captain Elias Monroe responded by enforcing a silence protocol across non-essential communications. His intention was control, but the effect was containment. Information suppression did not remove fear. It concentrated it. He maintained discipline outwardly, yet every decision now carried the weight of someone managing a situation that was no longer fully under command. In the radio room, Caleb Rourke recorded a low-frequency hum buried beneath normal transmission noise. It was subtle at first, almost indistinguishable from system interference. But its persistence confirmed it was not random. The frequency appeared structured, as though it belonged to something larger operating beneath the surface of known acoustic ranges. Mason later confirmed another anomaly. All sealed cargo containers were registering synchronized temperature drops. The change was uniform across multiple decks, occurring simultaneously without mechanical explanation. It suggested a coordinated internal response rather than isolated malfunction. During a routine inspection, one crew member vanished briefly from visual contact in a lower corridor. When he reappeared minutes later, he was physically unharmed but mentally distant, unresponsive to direct questioning, and unable to account for the time he had been missing. No one pressed further, but no one forgot. Psychological collapse began to spread in quieter forms. Crew members began believing the ship itself was aware, not metaphorically, but functionally. The structure felt reactive, as though it was adjusting to their presence rather than simply containing them. Elias concealed his escalating fear behind rigid command behavior, but Nora observed a change in him. He was no longer interpreting the situation as anomaly or malfunction. He was responding to it as if it were intentional. Her own suspicions shifted accordingly. The cargo was not just unstable. It was reacting in proximity, as though influenced by an external signal neither they could see nor escape. Then, deep within the lower decks, something shifted. The sealed door to the cargo substructure began unlocking itself from the inside. The moment the lower deck door seal began responding from the inside, still lingered in the crew's collective awareness, like a wound that refused to close. Even after systems stabilized on the surface, nothing aboard the MV Blackwater Dawn felt contained anymore. The sense of direction, trust, and control had already begun to fracture. Nora Vance realized the most terrifying truth, not that the ship was in danger, but that it was part of something designed long before she ever stepped on board. Nora forced her way into restricted digital archives using temporary clearance overrides obtained through emergency protocols. What she uncovered did not resemble standard shipping documentation. Instead, fragmented contracts appeared under layers of classification shielding, each one tied to an entity labeled only as a controlled research consortium with no public identity. The Blackwater Dawn was not a routine cargo vessel. It had been assigned to a classified transport operation linked to what internal documents referred to as a Recovered Oceanic Unknown Material Program. The wording was deliberately vague, but the repetition of containment directives suggested the cargo was not ordinary matter, but something retrieved under conditions that defied standard maritime explanation. When Elias Monroe confronted Nora's findings, his reaction was immediate but controlled only on the surface. For the first time, his authority faltered in visible form. He did not deny the existence of the program. Instead, he confirmed fragments of it, enough to reveal that he had known more than he had ever disclosed to the crew, though even he did not possess the full scope of what was aboard. In the radio room, Caleb Rourke intercepted an encrypted emergency recall signal. It was not routed through standard company channels, and it did not match any authorized command structure. The transmission carried urgency without origin, as if issued by an authority that existed outside the chain of command entirely. The signal repeated itself in cycles, then disappeared before it could trace its source. Below deck, Mason Creed reported structural irregularities forming across the hull. The changes were not physical damage, but internal reconfiguration, stress distributions shifting without external force. It was as though the ship's structure was adapting, subtly reshaping its own integrity in response to something internal rather than environmental pressure. Nora's emotional stability fractured as realization settled fully. She had not been sent as an independent investigator. Her role had been observational from the beginning. The mission parameters, the restricted access, and the controlled information flow all pointed to one conclusion. She was never meant to uncover the truth, only to witness its progression under controlled conditions. As trust collapsed, crew morale deteriorated rapidly. Command no longer held unquestioned authority. Conversations became fragmented, and silence replaced coordination. The Blackwater Dawn was no longer functioning as a unified vessel. It was becoming a collection of isolated individuals reacting to the same unseen force. At the same time, the GPS system ceased attempting correction entirely. Instead of shifting between coordinates, it locked onto a fixed set of unknown values that did not correspond to any charted ocean region. The change was not random. It felt final, as though navigation had accepted a destination beyond human mapping. Radio systems followed soon after. Across multiple channels, fragmented transmissions began repeating the same phrase, spoken in different languages, distorted yet structurally identical. No source could be isolated, and no origin could be confirmed. Elias made a decisive attempt to override course direction and divert the ship. The navigation system rejected the command instantly. No error message followed, only silence, as though the system itself refused acknowledgement. It became increasingly clear that the Blackwater Dawn was no longer responding as a machine built for human control. It was behaving as if it had a directive of its own. Then, without warning, the ship's communication system activated one final incoming transmission from company headquarters. The message contained only a single instruction: do not return, continue forward. The command from headquarters did not bring relief. Instead, it sealed the Blackwater Dawn inside a logic that no one aboard could escape or reinterpret. The instruction to continue forward felt less like guidance and more like abandonment wrapped in authority. What followed was not silence, but collapse. The terrifying realization spread instantly. Reality itself was no longer responding in a way humans could recognize or trust. The ocean changed first. It did not storm, shift, or fracture. It simply stopped behaving like an ocean. The water surrounding the ship turned unnaturally still, flattening into a reflective surface that resembled glass rather than sea. The MV Blackwater Dawn no longer cut through waves. It moved across something that looked more like a boundary than a body of water. On the radar, the anomaly escalated into something incomprehensible. Hundreds of ship signatures appeared across the display, perfectly structured and evenly distributed, yet none of them existed visually on the horizon. The contradiction was absolute. System confirmed presence, while the world outside denied it entirely. Then the auditory hallucinations began, synchronized across multiple crew members. Voices overlapped through intercoms and open corridors, not as isolated disturbances, but as shared experience. No one could agree on what was real sound and what was perception anymore, because everyone was hearing something slightly different yet eerily aligned in tone and rhythm. Mason Creed reported a complete engine shutdown, yet diagnostics showed full mechanical integrity. Fuel systems were stable. Rotational components were functional. There was no physical reason for failure. And yet propulsion had ceased entirely, as if motion itself had been paused rather than stopped. Nora Vance witnessed movement beneath the ocean's surface that defied explanation. Dark, elongated shapes shifted under glass-like water, not rising or sinking, but gliding parallel to the ship's trajectory. They were not reflections, not marine life, and not debris. They behaved like presence without form. In the radio room, Caleb Rourke attempted to establish external communication. Every channel returned silence. Satellite links, emergency frequencies, and encrypted backup lines all failed simultaneously. It was not distortion, it was total disconnection. The ship was no longer reachable from anywhere outside itself. Isolation became absolute. No external signal, no navigation confirmation, no environmental reference remained. The Blackwater Dawn existed in a sealed informational void, as if removed from every known communication network that defined its existence in the first place. Elias Monroe stood at the center of the bridge, caught between command instinct and something closer to survival awareness. Leadership demanded structure, but reality no longer supported structure. Every decision felt disconnected from consequence, as though outcomes were no longer predictable or even guaranteed to follow action. Inside the cargo holds, faint luminescence began to appear, not bright enough to illuminate, but visible enough to confirm activity. A low vibration glow pulsed through sealed containers in synchronized intervals, suggesting internal response rather than external influence. The ship was no longer just carrying cargo. It was reacting to it. Time itself began to fracture. Crew members reported inconsistencies in duration, moments stretching unnaturally or collapsing without warning. Conversations overlapped in ways that made sequence difficult to track. Even simple actions felt out of alignment with expectation, as though time had stopped behaving uniformly across the ship. The vessel drifted without propulsion, not forward, not backward, but in a direction that no instrument could define. Motion existed without cause, reinforcing the growing realization that physical laws were no longer being interpreted consistently within this environment. Psychological collapse followed quickly. Crew members stopped trusting their senses entirely. Sight contradicted sound. Instruments contradicted observation. Memory contradicted immediate experience. Reality itself no longer provided stable reference. Then, without warning, every light aboard the Blackwater Dawn flickered out for 3 seconds. When they returned, the horizon was gone. The return of light did not restore order. It only confirmed that whatever reality the MV Blackwater Dawn had been operating inside was no longer stable, recognizable, or anchored to anything human systems could interpret. The horizon's disappearance was not a visual loss. It was a removal of reference itself. In that final phase, the crew understood a devastating truth. Nothing aboard the ship was being destroyed. It was being erased from existence in real time. System failures cascaded across the vessel in complete sequence. Navigation, propulsion, communication, and structural diagnostics collapsed one after another, not through damage, but through refusal. Instruments did not break. They stopped acknowledging input entirely, as if the concept of operation no longer applied. Emergency evacuation protocols were triggered, but no distress signal transmitted beyond the ship. Every attempt to broadcast location or status dissolved into silence before reaching any external receiver. It was as if the ship had been removed from every network that could confirm its existence. Outside, the ocean remained unnaturally still. There were no waves, no wind patterns, and no horizon definition. The surface beneath the vessel resembled a vast, uninterrupted plain, no longer behaving as water in any conventional sense. Captain Elias Monroe made one final attempt to reconnect with the only thing that still tied him to a life beyond the ship. He activated a recording device and tried to speak a message to his daughter, but the system distorted his voice mid-transmission, fragmenting emotion into broken audio that never fully formed into words. Nora Vance stood motionless as realization settled completely. There would be no rescue, no retrieval, and no confirmation of distress. Not because help was unavailable, but because the vessel itself could no longer be located within any system that defined search or detection. In the radio room, Caleb Rourke captured one final fragment of signal. It was incomplete, unstable, and layered with interference that no longer resembled communication. It ended abruptly, not with silence, but with absence, like the signal had been cut out of existence rather than simply stopped. Mason Creed confirmed what should have been impossible. Structurally, the ship remained intact. Every system, every component, every mechanical layer still existed in functional condition. Yet reality around it was no longer aligned with physical continuity. The vessel was present, but no longer positioned within a recognizable framework of space. In that final emotional collapse, fear did not persist. It dissolved into something quieter, an acceptance shaped not by understanding, but by exhaustion. The crew no longer resisted what was happening, because resistance required belief in stable reality, and that belief had already been erased. A faint distortion formed along the perimeter of the ship, light bent without source, folding inward as if space itself were contracting around the Blackwater Dawn. The visual horizon collapsed not outward, but inward, as though the world was closing itself shut. Radar, satellite feeds, and physical observation failed simultaneously. The ship was no longer partially invisible. It was no longer present in any detectable form. Every system that had once confirmed its existence now registered nothing at all. And in the final psychological moment shared across the crew, one understanding settled without words. What was happening was not destruction. It was removal. The MV Blackwater Dawn did not sink, explode, or break apart. It simply vanished completely, leaving only empty ocean behind, and a radar system still tracking something that no longer existed.